Dear students, today we are going to talk about Introduction to Translation Studies. Translation Studies is an academic interdisciplinary dealing with the systematic study of the theory, description, and the application of translation, interpreting, and localization. This course examines the theory and the practice of translation from a variety of the linguistic and cultural perspectives. The course covers a wide range of issues and debates in translation studies and aims to provide students with an overview of the history of translation studies, different translation theories, and various approaches to translation. The basic premise of this course is if translators are adequately aware of the theoretical and historical dimensions of the discipline, they will be able to produce better translations. Besides this, Discourse also focuses on the application of various methods and approaches to different texts. Here are some course objectives. This course aims to impart knowledge of the notable translation theories to students, prepare them to critically reflect on different translation theories, enable students to apply the methods and the strategies discussed in the theories of the translation, acquaint them with the ideological and the political nature of translation, enable them to produce grammatically and stylistically appropriate translation. The term translation studies was coined by the Amsterdam based American scholar James S. Holmes in his paper The Name and the Nature of Translation Studies, which is considered a foundational statement for the discipline. In English, writers occasionally use the term translatology to refer the translation studies and the corresponding French term for the discipline in usually traductology. In the United States, there is a preference for the term translation and interpreting studies. Although the European tradition includes interpreting within translation studies. Today we will discuss a book introducing translation studies. We will discuss introduction about the translation studies. This book is written by Jeremy Monday. He is a senior lecturer in Spanish studies and translation in the University of Leeds, UK. This book was published in 2001 by Routledge, and this book contains 11 chapters with subtitles, and each chapter includes the following features: a table presenting the key concept, an intro outlining the translation theory, a chapter summary, discussion points, and exercises. Main issues of translation studies. Translation studies is a relatively new academic research area that has expanded explosively in recent years. While translation was formerly studied as a language learning methodology or as a part of comparative literature translation workshops and contrastive linguistic courses, the new discipline owes much to the work of James S. Holmes, whose The Name and the Nature of the Translation Studies proposed both a name and structure for the field. The interrelated branches of theoretical, descriptive, and applied translation studies have structured much recent research and have assisted in bridging the gulf that had grown between the theory and the practice of translation. Translation theory before 20th century. Before 20th century, it describes some of the major issues that are discussed in the writings about translation up to the middle of the 20th century. This huge range of over 2000 years, beginning with the Cicero in the 1st century, focuses on the literal versus free translation. Here I would like to explain the literal versus free translation. Literal translation is where the forms of the original are retained as much as possible, even if those forms are not the most natural forms to preserve the original meaning. Literal translation is sometimes called word for word translation as opposed to thought for thought translation. The next is free translation. Free translation is one which preserves the meaning of the original but uses natural forms of the target language, including normal word order and syntax, so that the translation can be naturally understood. Free translation is a kind of idiomatic translation, and imprecise and circular debate from which theorists have emerged only in the last 50 years. The chapter describes some of the classic writings on translation over the years, making a selection of the most well known and readily available sources. It aims to initiate discussion on some of the key issues: equivalence and equivalent effect. It deals with the concepts of the meaning, equivalence, and equivalent effect. Translation theory in 1960s under the Eugene Nida shifted the emphasis to the receiver of the message. This chapter encompasses Nida's generative influenced model of the translation transfer and his concepts of the formal equivalence and the dynamic equivalence. Newmark's similarly influential categories of semantic translation and communicative translation are also discussed, as is scholars' analysis of equivalence. Here I would like to explain Eugene Nida's translation theory. The translation theory of American linguist and translation theorist Eugene Nida were among the most influenced theories in China since 1980s. His most notable contribution to translation theory is dynamic equivalence, that is also known as functional equivalence. Actually, in this theory, Nida gave up the long-term used words throughout the history, such as literal translation, free translation, and the faithful translation. On the contrary, he advocated two equivalence ways as the basic directions and the guidelines of translation: dynamic equivalence and formal equivalence. Nida suggested the main difference between those two was the purpose of the translation. Here I would like to explain about the faithful translation. Faithful translation is it attempts to reproduce the precise contextual meaning of the original within the constraints of the TL. TL is target language. Of the TL grammatical structures, it transfers cultural words and preserves the degree of the grammatical and the lexical deviation from source language norms. It attempts to be completely faithful to the intentions and the text realization of the source language writer. Here, TL is our target language and SL is the source language. The translation shift approach. It details attempts that have been made to provide a taxonomy of the linguistic changes or shifts which occur in translation. The main model described here is Vinay and Darbyland's classic taxonomy, but reference is also made to Catford's linguistic model and Van Leeuwen's Zwart's translation shift approach from the 1980s. Here I would like to Catford definition about the translation, the theory. According to Catford, 1995, translation is the replacement of the textual material in one language, that is the source language, by equivalent textual material in an other language, that is the target language. Source language to target language. Functional theories of the translation. It covers race and Vermeer's text type and the Scopus theory of the 1970s and 1980s, and the Norse text linguistic approach. In this chapter, translation is analyzed according to the text type and the function in the TL culture or the target language culture, and prevailing the concept of the text analysis, such as word order, information structure, and thematic progression, are employed. The next is discourse and register analysis approaches and the systems theories. In discourse and register analysis approaches, it moves on to consider House's register analysis model and the development of discourse-oriented approaches. Here, I would like to discuss about the discourse, or you can say that the register analysis. Register analysis is the term register is used to denote the tone of a language. We speak within different registers each and every day without giving it a second thought, depending on the situation or the social setting we are in. For example, a college professor at university, when he will talk to his students, his talking style or his choice of words would be different. When he will talk to his colleagues, his choice of words would be different again. He would be friendly. And when he will talk to his boss or the director or the prorector or to the principal, he will be obedient, and his choice of words would be different again. Similarly, when he will goes to home, when he will talk to his wife or to his children and to his servants, his talking style would be different. This is like the tone. Your tone changes, or there is a variation of the tone according to the person, or you can say that it is based on the social and the cultural context. Systems theories, it investigates system theories and the field of the target oriented descriptive translation studies following Evan Zohar and the Torrey and the work of the manipulation school. Varieties of the cultural studies. It examines varieties of the cultural studies approaches in translation studies. These start with Lefever's work of the 1980s and the early 1990s, which itself arose out of a comparative literature and manipulation school background, and move on to the more recent development in gender studies and the translation in Canada, and to post-colonial translation theories in India, Brazil, Ireland. And the chapter then focuses on a case study translation from Asia or Asia. When we talk about the translation studies from Asia, you may observe that, like being an Urdu speaker, you are using, when you are giving respect to some of your boss or to some elder people, you are using up. And when you are translating your source language from Urdu to English, most of the time unconsciously you are using they, because in English language they are not using there isn't a difference in tum and up. For tum and up they are using only one word, that is you. Okay, that's why most of the time people, when they are translating from source language to the target language from Urdu to English, they are using they if they are giving respect to their teachers, if they are giving respect to their elders. Translating the foreign, the invisibility of the translation. It follows Berman and Venuti in examining the foreign element in the translation and the invisibility of the translator. The idea is explored that the practice of the translation, especially in the English speaking world, is considered to be derivative and second rate activity, and that the prevailing method of translation is naturalizing. The role of literary translators and the publishers is also described. Philosophical theories of translation. It investigates a selection of philosophical issues of language and translation, ranging from Steiner's hermeneutic motion, Pond's use of archaisms, and the Walter Benjamin's pure language, and Derrida and the deconstruction movement. Translation studies as an interdisciplinary. It sets out an interdisciplinary approach to translation studies. It discusses Snell Hornby's integrative approach and looks at the recent studies that have combined linguistic and the cultural analysis. The future of translation studies and the role of the modern technologies, including the internet, are also discussed.